Good morning. It's great to see you. I have for you a partial list of the comments on the website for the National Park Service. People who have visited one of the national parks and, they want to make a comment, rating, that sort of thing. You've all done that, right? Right? Oh, okay. All right. Here they are. A small deer came into my camp last night and stole my bag of pickles. Is there any way I can get reimbursed? Escalators would be helpful on steep uphill sections. Trails need to be wider so people can walk while holding hands. See? Valentine's Day. There you go. That's a good suggestion. Trails need to be reconstructed. Please avoid building trails that go uphill. Makes sense. There are too many bugs and leeches and spiders and spider webs. Please spray the wilderness to rid the area of these pests. Chairlifts need to be placed in places so that we can get to those wonderful views you brag about. The coyotes made too much noise last night and I couldn't sleep. You need to eradicate these animals. Here's a good one. A McDonald's would be nice at the trailhead. That's true. That would be nice. That would be nice. Too many rocks in the mountains. You need to have them removed. Too many rocks in the mountains. Okay. Too many trees blocking the view. Yes, at the National Forest, you should cut down all the trees so we can see better. Mountains are blocking the sunset. That's a helpful suggestion. And the wildlife were not as photogenic as I would like. Now, who wants to be the one to comb the hair on a porcupine or put makeup on a bear so they're more photogenic? I'm not volunteering for either one of those, okay? Those are just some. We like to complain, don't we? We kind of enjoy it. Evan and I were talking about the topic for this week, taken from Philippians chapter 2. Do everything without grumbling or complaining, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky. And Evan noted that most of the time when preachers preach about complaining and grumbling, what they're really doing is complaining and grumbling about all the complainers and grumblers in their church. And so I don't want to do that today. I want to be more positive about it. I want to look more toward the end of that verse, the part that we often forget. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky. You'll be different. You'll be a light in the darkness. One preacher asked his congregation, says, I'd like for all of you who are primarily complainers to raise your hand. And of course, there was one person that raised their hand, because there's always one person that, it's my job, it's my spiritual gift. I have the gift of complaining. But nobody, and then he said, now, if you're sitting next to someone who's a complainer and they didn't raise their hand when I asked the complainers and the grumblers to raise their hands, I'd like for you to meet with me after church today so we can grumble and complain about those liars. And isn't that kind of how we do it? Even when we're trying to point out the problem, we end up complaining about the people who are complaining. Well, Larry David, who wrote Seinfeld and later wrote Curb Your Enthusiasm, he's been on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. He does the same math that you and I do when it comes to complaining. And what is Critic's math? It's the mathematical formula most of us use when it comes to criticism. Here's an example of how it works. One insult plus 1,000 compliments equals 1 insult. Isn't that true? I remember somebody once said it takes 12 compliments to erase an insult. 12's not even close. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to erase an insult. You can probably think of one. I can think of one from first grade. I can't remember anything else about first grade. I'm doing lucky to remember college. But I can remember that one insult from first grade, from my first grade teacher, Mrs. Cooper, may she rest in peace. We need to look further at this Larry David story. There's an article in Rolling Stone that says, one night during his stay in New York, David went to Yankee Stadium to see a game. His image went up on the big screen as Curb Your Enthusiasm's theme played over the loudspeakers. An entire stadium of fans stood and cheered for the hopeless case from Brooklyn. It should have been a life-defining moment, the redemptive final scene in his life story. But it turned out not so much. As David left the stadium, a guy drove by and yelled, "Larry, you suck." That's like literally all that he heard, his friend said. All the way home to the hotel in Brooklyn, it kept running over and over in his mind. It was as if those 50,000 people who cheered him never existed. All he could think about is, why did that guy say that? What would lead anybody to do that? What was that? Why would you do that? Why would you say something like that? And that's all he remembered. And that's Critic's math. One insult plus 50,000 cheers equal one insult. How powerful is that? That one insult can erase an entire stadium full of people who stood up and applauded you, and it ends up in bitterness and disappointment. Maybe that's why Scripture encourages us to be people who look for the positive and not the negative. People who live in the positive and not the negative. People who think positive and not negative. People whose hearts are filled with the positive, with love and gratitude and acceptance and mercy and forgiveness and grace. Instead of people who are always looking for what's wrong, always looking for the downside, always looking for the problem, always looking for someone to blame. Here you are. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people hide a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Ephesians 4:29, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Think about that. Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what's helpful for building others up according to their needs. Not what you need, not what you'd like to see. Don't compliment them because they're doing what you want them to do. Compliment them because of who they are. Speak words that build people up rather than tear them down. Colossians 4:6, let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how to answer everyone who asks you. 1 Peter 2:12, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us. You see, complaining kills joy. It makes you unhappy. It makes everyone around you unhappy. I mean, how many of you like to be around a complainer? You just love to hang out with people and listen to them complain. There was a group of ladies at the church I served at that every Sunday they would go to lunch. And every Sunday they would complain about the worship service. It was too loud. It wasn't loud enough. Because like many of us, which I can testify to, they needed hearing aids. It was too hot. It was too cold. It was too long. I've never heard them say it was too short, though. No, that was not one of them. The preacher spoke too long. That one I heard almost every week. And so one Sunday I asked them that this week, would you go to lunch and just try not to complain about anything? And I said, I know it's going to be tough, but could you do that just this one Sunday? They got to lunch, and one of the ladies, the first thing she started doing was complaining. And they all looked at her, and she went, oh, we're not supposed to do that today. The sad thing is she said today. Now, tomorrow, we'll get back to our complaining. So they probably set up a time to meet later in the week to catch up on their complaining. The problem is, once you start to complain, it's really hard to stop. Because one complaint leads to another. One grumble causes another grumble. It becomes a habit, a bad habit. We can always find something to complain about, right? I mean, just take the weather, for example. If it's raining, we're complaining. If it's not raining, we're complaining. Well, I mean, in Florida, it rains all the time. Oh, we're in a terrible drought. It's too hot. It's too cold. Remember that a couple of weeks ago? We were all complaining about it being too cold. Well, how long will it be before we're complaining that it's too hot? Not long. It's too humid, it's too windy, or there's no breeze today. It's awful out here. Yeah, you get the idea. So we're somewhat conditioned by our society to complain. Look at the headlines in your newspaper. Well, you don't get newspapers anymore. Look at your headlines online. Look at the things that pop up. They're all negative because negative sells, right? That's why the newspaper used to be full of negatives. You had to search to page 14 to find something positive. And by our own nature and by our conditioning, we tend to form this habit of complaining. I mean, it starts young. I complained every morning about having to go to school. I complained every lunch about lunch at school. I complained when I got home that we had to stay at school for a whole 7 hours. How torturous is that? And of course, when I was in school, we went to school every day of the year, 365, in the snow, uphill both ways. We seem to just develop it at a young age, and we just keep going. And it gets worse and worse. But do all things without complaining. Do all things without complaining, without grumbling, without disputing, without arguing, that you may become blameless and harmless children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine like lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain or labored in vain. Paul is saying, just be positive. Be blameless. Just look on the bright side of life. That's the only part of that song I know. But look on the bright side. Look at what God has done for you. I mean, we're called to be different than our world. We're called to change our world like a light in the darkness. There was a professor one time and said, if God created the world and created everything, and there's evil in the world, then God must have created evil. And the student that was talking about it sat down. Another student stood up and said, Professor, is there cold? And he said, yes. And he said, no, actually, Professor, there's not cold. It doesn't exist. Cold is just the absence of heat. You can't talk about it. It doesn't exist if there's heat. He said, Professor, is there darkness in the world? And he said, well, of course there's darkness. I mean, every night there's darkness. He said, no, actually, there is no such thing as darkness. It doesn't exist. It's simply the absence of light. And when we talk about our world being dark, when we talk about a world caught up in darkness, it's just the absence of light. And what did Jesus say we were? You are the light of the world. And so everywhere you go, you bring light into the darkness. Think about that. Have you ever been in a cave and they turned the lights out? It takes about 7 seconds for people to panic. 7 seconds. Can you imagine? 7 seconds. And people start to freak out. And then the tour guide will light a match. And everybody goes, oh, good. There's light. One match in a dark cave. One match. One little flicker of light. And everybody goes, oh, okay. Everything's all right. That's us. We're that light in the darkness. We're that light that lets the world say, oh, it's not as bad as I thought. There's hope. We're not lost in this darkness. There's light in the world. So how do you change that habit? How do you get out of that? What do you do to fight against it? First thing you have to do is admit that there's a problem. And that's the toughest part. To admit that there's a problem. It's the first step in AA. Admit that you've got a problem. Stand up and say, my name's Don, and I'm a complainer. And you're supposed to say, hi, Don. See? That's all the other complainers saying hi to the new complainer. I mean, that's really where it starts. To admit that you just don't have the right approach to the world. It's not the way God wants you to live. It's not the way He designed you. Take time this week just to stop and ask yourself, wait, was I just sitting here complaining? Was I complaining to my neighbor, my spouse? Was I complaining to God about how unfair my life is? Was I complaining to God that I had to go to the doctor every day this week, which I did, by the way? And I did complain about it. I just did, just now. Did you catch that? It's so easy. It's so easy to get caught up in complaining. So first you have to admit their problem, and the second you have to address this issue deep inside. We in the church call it our heart. Jesus said, what's in your heart is what comes out of your mouth, or better yet, what comes out of your mouth tells you what's in your heart. Psychologists call it self-talk. You got to change the way you talk to yourself. You know, when we talk to ourselves, I think most of us talk to ourselves in a language. Usually it's our native tongue. I had a professor in college. He spoke German, he spoke Greek, he spoke Latin, he spoke English, he spoke French, and I don't know, there were a couple of others. Oh, Aramaic, in case you were wondering, nobody speaks Aramaic anymore. Nobody speaks Latin either, and he spoke that. One day he was talking in class, he was reading from the Old Testament. I was a senior in a freshman class. When I was a freshman, the professor was out of town for this semester. So I missed the class. When I was a sophomore, my schedule was too packed. And when I was a junior, I had too many classes going on, too many requirements. So now I'm a senior and I'm in a class with a bunch of freshmen, okay? And we all know, if you went to college, nobody respects freshmen. They're only going to be here, most of them, for a semester, and they're going to quit. So here I am, and the professor, Dr. Stuckenbrock, was reading from the Old Testament, and he said something like, "And Moses rose from the place he was seated and spoke unto the multitude." And some kid behind me goes, "Guy can't even read." And I turned around and I said, he's reading from Hebrew, he's thinking it in German, and he's translating into English so idiots like you and I can understand it. After class, when I was leaving, Dr. Stuckenbrock said, "You were kind of hard on that guy." And I felt terrible. But you see, we all think in our language. We all have these words that we speak to each other, but we have words that we speak to ourselves as well. And sometimes they're very negative. Be careful about your language that you use with yourself. It's really easy to focus on our struggles and our limitations, on our weaknesses, on our failures, on our shortcomings, on our mistakes, on our sins. As a matter of fact, it's easy to focus on other people's mistakes and sins and problems too. But when you think negatively, you're going to act negatively. And when you think only of your failures, you're going to fail. And once you get in that negative routine, it becomes a downward spiral. It can lead to depression. I mean, it can lead to real, clinical, diagnosable depression, making it nearly impossible to be positive. Instead, start thinking about grace and the goodness of God. Start thinking things like, God loves me no matter what. God forgives me. He thinks I'm special. He thinks I'm so special that he sent his son to die for me. Let me give you an example of this kind of self-talk, okay? You get up in the morning, you look in the mirror, and you say, my counselor, the preacher at church, told me not to have negative thoughts, not to speak negatively to myself, but man, I am really ugly in the morning. My eyes are all baggy and saggy, and man, look at the weight I've put on. You can see it in my face, and oh man, I'm a mess. And then you go, oh, well, you idiot, you're not supposed to talk mean to yourself. And you just did it again. And it's just a downward, even when you're trying to tell yourself not to talk to yourself that way, you talk to yourself that way. And you don't even realize it's happening, and one day you wake up and you can't get out of bed because you can't face the mirror anymore. It's self-talk. It's heart talk. Let God talk to your heart. Let Him be the one that tells you what you're like and what you look like to Him. Can you ever try to imagine what you look like in God's eyes? Don't go negative, because God doesn't see that. You remember that old thing about as far as the east is from the west, so far have I removed your sin from you? I've taken your sin and I've buried it in the deepest ocean. So don't think negative. What does God think of you? Does He stand there like this, like you do with your grandchildren? Waiting for you to run and jump in His arms? I remember when Evan was little, our pastor, Dick Alexander, big, tall guy. Evan would run down the hall and jump into his arms. We went back there for my daughter's wedding, and Evan saw Dick and started running for him, but Evan was like 18 then. And Dick went, no! Isn't that how God sees? Honestly, that's how God sees you. He looks at you and goes, oh, look, it's my kid. I love my daughter so much. I love my son so much. They're so wonderful. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honorable, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there is any virtue at all, if there is any praise, think on these things. When you look at the person next to you, if there's anything good about them, think about that. If you look at your church and there's anything good about it, think about that. If you look at your world, if there's anything good about it, think on that. If you look at your blood test results, if there's anything good on it, think about that. We've got to change the way we talk to our hearts so that when our mouths open, those good things come out. Which leads to the next point. Speak positively. Not only do you need to think those positive thoughts, but you have to speak them, to lift other people up, not to tear them down. Habits can only be broken by replacing them with something else. Take out the complaining and replace it with something positive. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that they may benefit those who listen. Find some way to say something positive. Paul's saying, don't let any junk come out of your mouth. Only that which helps other people with their needs, that benefits them, that lifts them up, that encourages them. If you look at all the one another's in Scripture, you will be amazed at how many of them say something like, love one another, encourage one another, lift one another up, carry one another's burdens. Just over and over in describing what we should be as a church, that's how we should treat one another. That's how we should live with one another, where we encourage and lift people up. And finally, look for God in every situation. When you're sitting at home and you're looking at your life, look at what God has done. When you get the bad report from the doctor, look at the long life you've had without that. Look around you and see how bad it could be. And thank God. And also, look for the good in other people. Not just in the situation, not just in what's going on in life, but when you look at the people around you, you can find plenty to pick on. If you look at me, there's a whole bunch. If you want to know, on a bad day, I could give you a list. There's always negative things to be said. There's always negative things to look at. There's always the downside, right? We got to look at the downside. We think that somebody has to be the devil's advocate. He doesn't need any advocates. He does fine all on his own. He's the one that whispers in your ear all those negative things. He doesn't need any help. We don't need to help him with that. We don't need to point out someone else's faults. They know them all too well. They know him. We don't have to point him out. What they've forgotten are all the good things about themselves. If you want to get victory over complaining, look for God's hand in every situation, in every circumstance, in every person, in the rough times, and you're going to have rough times. Be aware that God is there with you. On that bad day, God is there with you. I heard somebody say, when you cry those tears, Jesus cries them too. He's there. He's walking beside you. Look for God in every situation. No matter how big your problem is, it's temporary. Now, you're going to say, wait a minute, this has been going on for 20 years. And 20 years is a long time. Compared to eternity, 20 years is, well, it's over. I was going to tell you how long it was, but it's over already. We've got an eternity to spend with God. So whatever problems and heartaches we're going through, they're temporary. They're only going to last that long. Because we're meant to live forever. Eternity, infinity. So look for God in every situation. And that's why the Bible is so careful to remind us over and over again not to complain, not to grumble. Because when we grumble, we leave God out of the situation altogether. When we're complaining, we've forgotten all about God. When we're paying the consequences of our sin, we forget all about God's grace. When we get caught doing something stupid, or we catch ourselves doing something stupid, we forget that God's mercy covers that too. When we look at our life and go, I'm a mess, God looks at us and says, but I made you something else. Oh yeah, you were a mess, but I made you something else. I made you into something lovely and perfect. I made you into something worthy of my love, worthy of my Son's death on that cross. That's how much I love you and I care for you. As the band comes up, I want to tell one little story. It's from Jeff Foxworthy. You know, you're a redneck if. Okay, how many of you have heard him do that and at least one of those things applied to you? Raise your hand. Come on. At least one of them, right? Well, he tells the story about when he was a teenager. He lived in a little town in Kentucky, or was it Georgia? I can't remember. Little town, the first location, the original location of Chick-fil-A. We all love Chick-fil-A, right? The owner, the founder of Chick-fil-A was a guy named Truett Cathy. And Jeff knew him as a high school student. And he said, Mr. Truett was the wisest man I have ever met in my life. He said, bar none, he was the wisest person I have ever met. And one day he said to me, Jeff, I have a question for you. And Jeff was thinking, oh, this will be good, because, this guy's, he's sharp. He said, Jeff, how do you know if somebody needs to be encouraged? And Jeff goes, I don't know. He goes, if they're breathing. If they're breathing. And Jeff said, from that day on, I made it a point in my life, to this very day, I'm still doing this, that I look for people that need to be encouraged, and I find a way to do it. He said, when I'm at the fast food restaurant and there's a guy cleaning the tables, and he's working like a dog trying to keep up, and nobody ever says thank you to him. Nobody ever even acknowledges him. He just goes about his job, and I go up and say, you know what? You're working really hard. You're good at this stuff. And he goes, and when you go to the restaurant on prom night, and there's this high school girl running the register because she didn't get invited to the prom, I go up and say, I really like your hair. That looks great on you. And he says, I try to find something positive to say to everybody I meet because I know it makes a difference. It definitely makes a difference in that moment, but it probably makes a difference in that day. It may be the highlight of their week, right? Someone once said, you've never locked eyes with someone that God doesn't love. Find a way to be an encourager. And if you can find that in your life, the complaints will melt away. You'll forget about them. They won't be important. Truett Cathy, one of the wisest men he had ever met in his life. I got to agree. Thank you.